Hi everyone, welcome. If you're all just trickling in, my name is Andrew Apostola, and today we're going to be exploring the future of cultural institutions online and their audiences and how they can move online. We're joined today by some really great guests, and I'll take the opportunity to introduce them all in a few moments, but there's going to be just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, and as you know, usually people will trickle in, so I'm going to slow it down quite nicely and walk through. So just in terms of what's going to happen today, it's going to go for roughly around an hour. I want to say roughly, spot on an hour. We're going to stop at a hard 2 p.m. And we run most of our events like that because we understand that people have meetings to go to, and we want you to make sure that you feel like you can stay for the whole time. Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A chat as well. And if you have any trouble if you have any trouble basically with technically or questions, Hayley, who I'll introduce you to in a moment, will be able to help you out. So I'll start with some acknowledgements, then we'll go into the panelists and everyone who's part of this, putting this on together today. Then we're going to have a bit of a discussion around the current environment. So what we're seeing at the moment, we know we're in COVID and there's a lot of challenges happening around Australia and the world. So we'll talk a little bit about what people are experiencing. We'll then move on to talking a little bit about the challenges around programming and curation and what people are facing within the bodies and institutions we're talking about, before going into a discussion about some of audience behaviours and shapes of how things might change, or how people might be changing their behaviours. And then we'll talk about the technology and move to a Q&A. The Q&A will be for about 15 minutes. So put your Q&A questions in the channel and we'll grab them there. And also I want to encourage everyone, if you're just joining us, feel free to shout out, say hi, tell us where you're from. It's really nice when people can, you're welcome to use that channel just to say hi and be a good way to connect. So really, really great. I'd like to, our webinar today is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. And I'd like to also pay my respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be in attendance today. Thank you, welcome, and welcome to everyone for coming. It's great to be presenting and during the setting. I want to mention that we are presenting during the context of COVID. So if you're watching this in the future, there might be some changes or differences, which may include also children entering the room, and it's a real possibility. So just want to thank you for working with us if that might happen during this session. We are portable, so if this is the very first time you've been involved with us, welcome. We're a digital innovation company based in Melbourne, Australia. We've been around for 15 years. We've got a mission to go out there and find areas of social need and policy failure, and then use what we know about design, research and technology to bring about transformational change, either by ourselves, through our own research, or partnering with others. We've got a whole bunch of reports in this area. I won't go into too much, but they're free on our website. Have a look and use them as a conversation starter. Use this video too if you're watching it in the future as well. So over to our wonderful guests, and I'm super excited to be here. I've had the pleasure of working with all of our guests today, and over the various years in various roles at both ends of my career. So it's really nice to have everyone come together. First, I'd like to introduce Esther Anatolidis, who's a writer, facilitator and critic with an abiding interest in how art creates public spaces in all of its forms. She's the Executive Director of the National Association for the Visual Arts and an extremely passionate advocate more generally for the arts. If you had the pleasure of meeting Esther, you'd know that firsthand, and you'll get the chance to see it today. She's been at the helm of many significant cultural institutions over her career, including Regional Arts Victoria, Melbourne Fringe, Sin Media, Craft Victoria, the Emerging Writers Festival. I'm going to keep going. Express Media. She's just, I think, and I'm probably missing about another half dozen. So welcome, Esther. Great to have you here today.
It's so fantastic to be here. Thanks, Andrew.
Great. I'd like to introduce Al Kossar, and he's the current artistic director of the Melbourne International Film Festival. He's now presenting. Is this your third festival, Al?
I've been working for MIF since 2011, but I was acting AD in 2018 and then 2019 and now. So I've had a few different business cards over the years. Yeah.
How many have you done completely online?
This would be the only one we've done completely online. But prior to that, you may know me from such jobs as working for you as program director for the Portable Film Festival.
Very, very true. Also, you're the board member for the Human Rights Film Festival, festival manager for Flickerfest. And yeah, I hope the Portable Film Festival comes up. For those of you who haven't heard about it, Portable as a company started as a film festival 15 years ago, and I had the pleasure of working with Al. It was the world's very first completely entirely online film festival, and so I'm sure we'll talk about how maybe Al's brought some of those skills into his current predicament at MIF. I'd also like to welcome Sarah Firth, who will be visually documenting this session. So hi Sarah in the background there. Great.
I love Sarah's work.
So you'll be able to, we'll be distributing some of her work later on and sharing those insights visually. So thanks, Sarah. As well as Hayley Hewitt, who'll be running the Q&A and technical support there later on. So, hey Hayley, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you guys going?
Good stuff. Great. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so I'm just going to kick things off, and then I'll stop the share screen so everyone can see each other's faces more clearly. Maybe just to kick things off, many of the institutions were already engaging with people virtually before this whole pandemic. Many museums offer virtual tours of their current exhibitions. There's games, there's interactive features for kids. Film festivals have been putting on parts of their programs online for years. It's a staple. There's downloadable apps, there's user-generated content, there's online ticketing. So I think, you know, we've got to start this conversation from a place where, you know, online and digital is very much, I think, in the thinking of a lot of people, and in, I guess, the trajectory and the landscape that people see forward. But obviously there's a lot of change happening at the moment. And I'd just like to start at that point, and maybe potentially start with you, Esther. You're closely connected to artists throughout your roles at the National Association for Visual Arts and past work. I'm really interested to see hear from you what you're seeing and hearing from artists and from people at cultural institutions at the moment about what's actually happening. What are their experiences? What are some of their concerns? What sort of conversations are you having?
Look, I think it is a really bizarre time, I think is a good place to start. We're in a situation where it's very, you know, there's such a great deal of uncertainty. It's unclear how people can and should engage. It's now I've just lost everyone's visual, so I'm hoping that you can still see me.
Sorry, yeah, we can see you. I've shot the share screen, so we can all see you clearly in full screen.
Oh, okay, wonderful. I'm trying to return to it on my view as well. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, a bizarre time. It's a situation with, you know, let's face it, a pandemic that has no cure and that behaves in some very unusual ways. The uncertainty of how do you plan, how do you know, what does the future look like? That affects us on a deep kind of, you know, health and mental health level. And then it affects anyone who is in an organization or who is an artist whose work is about inspiring us, nurturing our souls, expanding our horizons, and so on. Institutions have been in a very difficult situation of this coming on the back of summers, fires and floods, many years of, you know, those who are in receipt of public funding of a crisis there, a great deal of uncertainty and so on. And then this situation has, I guess, exposed the digital divide, not just in terms of like from the audience point of view, you know, those of us with that privilege to be able to sit here comfortably and have like an internet that works, but also for organizations. Some of the most interesting work being done across the arts is at that, you know, fast moving, agile, innovative, smaller end. People don't necessarily have the resources to suddenly translate everything online. And so it's bigger institutions who are able to do that. So what does that mean then for the future of the ecology in that sense? And then just when we thought that we were kind of getting back on track again, the virus has exploded again in Australia, in New Zealand, in other parts of the world. I'm following the Greece situation very carefully, another, you know, wave outbreak there, so I'm concerned about family. And so it's uncertainty from a sector that is creative and in many ways is used to introducing uncertainty and introducing that exciting element. But we'd also love to know, what are the parameters of connecting with audiences and how is everyone coping with the enormous health uncertainty?
It's a really interesting point there you put forward, Esther, just around the resources that are required, because, you know, people, you know, generally people that are producing great work put all their effort into the production and the programming and the content, and leave very little behind, or they wish they could have more, like, you know, but leave not much to the actual infrastructure of broadcast. So yeah, I wonder, Al, in terms of you know your experience, is that something that MIF is kind of, MIF is like, you know, one of a very large film festival. I'm interested what you guys were thinking about when all this happened.
Absolutely. Look, that point Esther was making, I think specific to agility, is one that kind of resonates for me, because for us, you know, we're a pretty sizable film festival. We're the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, nearly 70 years old. There's really decades of tradition and, you know, an at-scale delivery, where we're talking about a festival that, you know, attracts 190,000 people, a program of 386 films last year, 10 cinema venues, a number of kind of ancillary kind of points in terms of talent development programs. There's a lot of moving parts, put very simply as well. And so we considered, I guess, the situation from the horizon line of March. And for us, you know, I guess there were a couple of things. You know, once you get past board and management discussions and external risk consultation and scenario modeling, and all the pieces of formality, it was a hard decision, but it was also a very clear decision in terms of our context specifically. I mean, the first is really your duty of care to audience from a public health and safety standard, but as well as that, to the people who are physically delivering your festival, because MIF specifically is a not-for-profit organization. We have about 400 volunteers each year who are integral to helping people actually physically and logistically navigate what the festival is. And so, you know, we obviously have a duty of care to those people very importantly as well. We were looking at, you know, what is the best possible case in terms of August and what might that look like? And even if when we had been in a position where cinemas were reopened within Victoria, you still have that complexity layered one on top of each other in terms of gathering bans, plus social distancing protocols, but then also the social anxiety and the psychology of the audience and what that equates to specifically in the space as well, because you very much, like, I think, who was it? Spike Lee, I think, was tweeting that he's not going back into a cinema until a vaccine exists. Like, for some people, it's considering what is the longitudinal impact of their audience going, their attendances in this sort of cultural space as well. And, you know, for us, MIF is part of a festival ecosystem and a screen culture ecosystem that, you know, is global and it's worldwide. And films obviously move through a variety of kind of distributive points, be they festivals or territory sales, world premieres within territories, and so on and so forth. So the more things that collapse, postpone, or kind of fade into uncertainty very quickly, the more that domino effects really disrupts your film supply chain, but also your capacity to overall produce and deliver what that scale of event is to any degree of certainty. So at that point in April, we made the call that there was no path to delivering MIF as a regular festival in cinemas in a regular kind of mode of delivery. And we really used that as the jumping off point to say, well, what is possible in this space at this time? And how do we find and foster audiences? How do we meet people where we are in this moment specifically? Yeah.
Wow. Like I can't imagine the types of programming decisions. Like, were you coming into March, like coming into February, just going, great, you know, we've done this before, we've got all this lockdown, I know what films we're going to be playing. We, you know, by June we'll be writing up the program, it'll be distributed out through. Did the program element change much during that?
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of January, February, March, we use a lot of that time to scout film festivals overseas. It's spaces where we can do a lot of travel, see a lot, go to film markets where we can meet all the people we work with in the course of a year at one time, do all of those things. So I had just gotten back from True False Film Festival in Missouri about late March, about a week before the States started to get pretty complex in terms of airports and that kind of situation. And at that point, yeah, there was a lot in the program, and there was a lot of larger scale things. You know, there are certain elements of the program, particularly some of the big music on film sort of things that take many, many months of run up. So there were major projects that we were working towards the delivery of that suddenly became absolutely impossible. And, you know, in terms of all of that scouting and kind of going off a bit of a cliff in terms of March, in terms of the future sort of launch of a huge swathe of films. And obviously you have these key tentpole scouting sources on what a festival calendar year is between Cannes and places like that. So conversely, at this moment, you have films that are going into various states of limbo. They themselves are waiting out a period of uncertainty, as was saying, or they're purely going into hibernation. They're saying, shut it down for 2020. We'll see what next year brings. We'll reset our distributive and audience strategy, and we'll choose to take one step back and, you know, try to defend what audience and programming opportunities and sales opportunities we have within the next calendar year. So people are in a variety of states of defensiveness, very, very understandably from a content point of view.
Esther, is this resonating with you? Like, in terms of the pipeline and flow of work and the schedules of artists moving into, different spaces across Australia, how's that line up with what you've experienced?
I think that's the massive issue. But first of all, just listening to what Al was just saying, I just want to give him a great big hug. God, because even having gone through that, you're presenting this amazing festival. Like, I've just been, you know, the Melbourne International Film Festival, 68.5, which I've loved, this year has just been, it's been so important. I've heard friends and colleagues call it a lifeline. I have so been enjoying the sense of community around it, you know, that we've been finding, you know, well, what have you seen? What did you think? And of course, MIF and any film festival is in a unique position because the work can be shown online in a way that doesn't change the nature of the work, but does of course change the nature of the way that it is, received and the experience. And so it's like the broader institutional question. I think about galleries and think about anyone working in, a range of different practices, is that yes, you can show images of a work online or images of an exhibition, or, you know, a film can be shown online, but the experience of a festival, of a premiere, of, you know, being in a gallery, in a museum, in an artist studio, it's multisensory, it's tactile, it's emotional, it's social, it is all the things that make us human. And so that, to answer Andrew's question, there's been a massive disruption around professional pathways for individuals, around the timelines and cycles for organizations, and do you postpone, do you compress programs, what's the festival calendar, the biennial calendar, and so on, you know, do you skip a year, in some situations it's not about just a couple of months, it's actually an entire year that's lost. And then the conversation around, well, when we look at that ecosystem that Al mentioned, but also the calendar, you know, there's no such thing as the arts calendar that someone is sitting around going, okay, well, if you move to that date, then they've got to move there. And so, you know, they'll work out from an audience perspective. Well, that's massive disarray as well. And that's going to take a long time to schedule. It's about all the pipeline issues that Al was mentioning. But then it's also our experience as audience members. Like, we know that certain things happen certain festivals are presented at certain times of year. And in terms of our social relationships, the way that we engage with things, the way that the seasons turn, that affects us all as well.
I'm wondering, I'm interested if, just picking up on a point there, do you think that given what we know now, people will be, like curators will be sort of like pivoting towards content they know that audiences can digest in the new format?
Yeah, and this is a real worry, because then you look at, okay, which artists and art forms and sectors is this going to disadvantage? I've also in the last, weeks been hearing about colleagues who are, in the first weeks of the situation in Victoria thinking, oh, well, I might just have to think twice about Victorian artists and Victorian colleagues for future things. Now, of course, the situation is spreading and we're seeing different, peaks and troughs across Australia and across the world, and we're very much understanding that this isn't over, and the path to recovery, as all the experts have been saying, is absolutely non-linear. And so then the question becomes about art form practice, about the way that work is presented and discussed. And I think one of the really interesting questions for curation going forward is going to be, okay, well, how do you facilitate an online experience which is online plus something else, which asks something of you in a different way? Because, we've all been talking about how zoomed out we are in terms of meetings and so on. And so the next, that next step of thinking, of pivoting, as you say, has to be about, how do we now bridge for everyone the online and the tactile, the fact that our homes have been commandeered in different ways, the experience of being contained, the way that we can shift someone's perception as well as perspective and have that be part of the experience. So I think all these things will start to be discussed now.
Hal, I remember, I'm going to build on that point. I remember years ago when the Portable Film Festival was on, I remember David Lynch said of us and others like us, I can't remember the words, but some sort of expletives that if you try and think of watching a film on a mobile device, you're an effing idiot, like, or something like that. In this context, right, where we have no choice, like, are you kind of seeing, surely there's some nuance that might be happening around how filmmakers and film and institutions are looking at presenting their works, not outside of just pressing play on a video.
Absolutely. I mean, like the online space obviously is one that is fully immersed with PVOD and TVOD and different streaming platforms, and it's very populated in that sense. And I think festivals are emerging into it by necessity very, very quickly, and kind of navigating and kind of replanting themselves within that space. Industry is figuring it out, audience is figuring out, all of those things are converging kind of amorphously in ways that which really encourage a degree of experimentation specifically this year as well, which is terrific. In terms of the online viewing experience, I mean, the first thing to say is a lot of people's lounge rooms have been significantly up-resed from where they were 10 years ago. People have equivalent home cinemas now. And, myth at heart is something that happens in cinemas. We happen at theater scale where, that is something that's very, very important to us. But, at a point at which that is not possible, to see people as audiences being adaptive technically and socially to those spaces is really fascinating. I mean, the festival for me, as I think Esther talked to all of the qualities of what we expect from a festival experience in a variety of ways so eloquently. And I'll just add that for us, the festival is the films, it's the sum total of the films, it's what the program says, I guess, programmatically at its fullest, but it's also the spaces between films and how do we fill those, and how do we connect artists to audience, and what does that social fabric of the festival look like? Because if we don't have that, then we're trying to replicate Netflix, or we're trying to replicate something which is a technical and a platform and a playlist experience, which doesn't have that dimensionality for anyone, for audiences or for filmmakers who want to see people engage with their work in substantial ways, or community who find something so positive and connective in what the fabric of those experiences are outside of the specific act of viewing a film as well. Yeah.
Well, I'd maybe like to use that as a jumping off point to talk about audiences, which are obviously the crucial part of this discussion. The Met said the week after it closed its doors to the public, there was a 9-fold increase in traffic on its Met Kids pages, where children can watch videos on how to recreate a dance scene or do Japanese origami. Traffic for its 360 series of short videos surged more than 4,000%. Like, what are we learning about audiences' relationships to technology? What content are they capable of engaging with, and how are we kind of seeing them change, you know, in across the sector?
Yeah, this is really interesting. There have been some studies that, these audience monitor surveys that the Australia Council's been doing, which have been about, you know, the risk appetite people are willing to take in terms of going to, you know, in real life stuff in the future, but also some online stuff. There's some interesting insights there. I think one of the, and Andrew's just pointed that the big one has been about, you know, for children, because for those with kids, trying to work from home while also be, you know, primary care, primary educator for children, especially young children, has been very difficult. I know I've got friends with kids who had never really wanted them to be sitting in front of iPads, who are just like, here, watch this. And then you look at a range of things that friends and colleagues are developing, and think, okay, well, look, that's fantastic. I think the in the biennial, such as the Biennales background, really kind of enriched material online around interviews, around in-depth. There's a range of ways that, again, using that online experience for some of those depth experiences that you generally would have had only if you went on a floor talk or a tour, or you know, that kind of experience of being present. And so I imagine those kinds of things will stick around. But a real challenge from the audience point of view, or rather from the audience engagement point of view, has been around organizations and how do you, you know, in an incredibly competitive landscape, draw revenues from this. So many years ago, a former CEO of the Sydney Opera House was asked in an interview, who do you think your major competitors are? And he said, the couch. Because of course, you know, there's, you might go to the Opera House, you might just sit at home and watch TV. And in a situation where we've got, you know, local content quotas being relaxed, we've got, you know, a small amount of money that's gone to support local screen production, and then 8 times that amount of money that's gone to support Hollywood to work in Australia. You know, as an audience member, I can sit down, we can all sit down and watch anything from anywhere in the world, and often for free or with the small amount that we've paid each month for a subscriber service. And so that's a massive challenge.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting. Like, people didn't do that in the past, though. Like, I'm thinking about these organisations where the average age might be over 60 or 55, and they're I guess they're used to the digital format is just not first nature to them.
Yeah.
What's the average audience of MIF, and how do you?
Look, it'll be really interesting to see how that changes or evolves specifically in this year, obviously with the platform, but also with a national reach as opposed to something localized to Melbourne and regional surrounds as well. But our demographics have a very interesting even flow, pretty much from 18 plus, but 25 to 39 is where it mostly lands in a regular year. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, you just brought up the fact that you're reaching beyond the walls of Melbourne now. And I think that's a kind of, you know, an interesting opportunity for institutions to think about. Like, you think of the reach of platforms like the New York Times, everyone knows about it around the world, and it's a news platform, but it's only New York, whereas, you know, you wouldn't know much about like the Chicago Tribune or so yeah, I guess I'm fascinated to think about is that something that you think could permanently change the way in which you approach MIF as a festival or as an audience base?
Look, yeah, look, absolutely. And look, I have to qualify that by saying, you know, we're one of a number of, you know, amazing film festivals around Australia. So there also has to be a certain kind of understanding of how everyone fits together as a piece of the puzzle in terms of, I guess, the national audience and offering. But we very much see, I guess, the development of this digital platform as an investment. It obviously makes the sense to think of it in those terms, and you know, a way to reach and activate and meaningfully engage with audiences that have no visibility of the festival or prior experience of it. So to that extent, we already have future projects which are lined up immediately after this, when our festival finishes on the 23rd of August. Next up is in September, we've got our MIF Schools program, which would usually be a regular element taken within the larger festival program, and a part of the audience which is very much presented for under 18s with attending schools, contextualized by webinars and such as well, and largely aligned with MLTAV in terms of languages taught in secondary schools. But you know, that will go online via our platform in September. It will be a regional and national reach for the first time. The films will be free in that context, and free webinars. So there's a huge, I guess, social good and social benefit in terms of audience development opportunities, both in terms of general public, but here in terms of the educative sector and beyond as well. What it really invites us to do is just flip our thinking in pretty radical ways, and just say, well, you are not tethered physically to a location and physically to a set of secreting circumstances. And what is the positive opportunity within that context to sort of reach out and develop further? So there's lots of things we're thinking about. We have to think about the long term in terms of the COVID situation specifically as well. And maybe next year everything's back to normal, and that's that. Maybe next year, in a worst case scenario, it's, you know, we are in this situation. Maybe there is some other point on that continuum in terms of a hybrid delivery of digital and physical, and what that looks like as well. I mean, the real challenge for us and many other organizations exactly in our position is, what is the plan A, B, C, and D? What is your timeline and what is your resource span in terms of when you have to commit and when you have to make the jump in terms of delivering in a particular way to both future-proof your offering and to ensure that your audience has access to it as well. And I think we've kind of tried to consider what is the flip in terms of that programming from an audience point of view, also from a festival delivery point of view. I mean, one specific example of that for us at this stage is to think, well, in terms of the people we engage with outside of the films, how does that translate? And so we have a virtual guest lineup, Q&As, and you know, amazing people who probably would never jump on a plane for 30 hours in the middle of winter in the middle of very busy schedule. So, you know, we've got Aubrey Plaza and Kelly Reichardt and Riz Ahmed and all kinds of pretty amazing people that would be incredibly difficult for us to reach and engage with in a regular year in terms of positive opportunity for audiences. Yeah.
Just on that internationalization, you made me think of something, Al, that, you know, when you think about like, what's the point of difference, and, you know, comparing them to other festivals, that issue of the local, you know, and what makes a local festival. Like, you know, here I am today on the lands of the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And a few weeks ago, I was facilitating an online event, and Pabinata Dr. Carolyn Briggs, the Boonwurrung elder, gave the welcome at the beginning. And of course, we were all, you know, located all over the country, but connected here. And that got me to thinking, as does this, you know, what then makes that festival experience local? Because one of the wonderful things about the Melbourne Film Festival is over there and you know, that whole kind of social experience. And so then what does it kind of, yeah, how does that audience, that kind of feeling of, you know, how do we then, and is it through, yeah, I think that the challenge for curation to then present as an international, that anyone can jump into, but that it's going to be this uniquely Melbourne kind of vibe. And how do we do that online?
Yeah, I've actually got a question for we're jumping ahead, but Veronica's just sort of asked as well. They're a small org with a mission to support and promote digital media arts in Maribyrnong. How do you keep this sense of place and space when you shift to the online approach? There's a similar kind of vein there, I'd imagine. So I cut you off, Al. I think you're about to.
No, definitely. Look, the first point I was going to make is look, I mean, what we tried to do programmatically here is do something that wasn't a compromise in terms of what we wanted to achieve, and by that, do something that was true to the personality of MIF's programming and audience expectations to it, and knowing what that would be like. And it's been interesting to see what the opportunity again is in that space. We've got, we know the qualities of our audience, and therefore we try to appeal to those kind of points within MIF that would be incredible for them in a regular year. And there are things which work even better in this space. I mean, one example is we're playing, one 14-hour film. It's Mark Cousins' Women Make Film. It's a collaboration with Jane Fonda, Tilda Swinton, Tandy Newton. It's 13 decades of cinema, 183 female directors. It's essentially a film school in a film, but it's 14 hours long. And you always have a hardcore cinephile audience at MIF who will look for that thing which is their Cine Everest, and will look for that thing which personally challenges the limits of their attention span. And you look for those points of continuity that will bring people familiarity to what they expect sort of programmatically. And another part of that comes, I guess, from audience up. And, Esther, you kind of mentioned the running around Melbourne and winter thing. And, we've had multiple people on social media who are saying, just to simulate the MIF experience fully this year, I'm going to wait outside my house in the cold for half an hour before I start streaming a movie. And you get some of those things bubble up in really interesting ways. And it takes me back actually to the Portable Film Festival, which, has, at its time, an international audience. And what it was really amazing at was fostering that degree of community and connection and visibility between audiences, no matter where they are. And it would foreground that difference and that contrast between audiences, and then it would make that a real point of connection. So there was a portable screening day, and people were, encouraged to share exactly how they were screening and where they were screening, and the crazy circumstances in which they'd watch films. So, someone was on the middle of a desert landscape on a bridge in Mongolia. Someone else was on a public bus in Auckland doing laps of the city, and you kind of saw each other, and just trying to find ways to actually create that visibility between audiences and the space between films is the best way to kind of remind people. So we've got a UGC campaign as part of the festival at the moment. It's created for us by Guilty Content and features Hannah Gadsby, and the whole thing is essentially it's the promo is a whole collection of chairs, very ornate chairs, kind of Wes Anderson production design in terms of this is your seat, your seat. The tagline is the best seat in the house. It's hashtag. We get people to kind of send in, this is their best seat in the house. This is what they're watching from. And just those little points of detail that kind of really speak to kind of audience connection and familiarity. Wherever you can push the button on those is sort of the way to do it, really.
Oh, I think you've really captured that beautifully. Thank you. I think that sense of like, I'm not even leave it at that. Can I move on? Because I want to just leave that section because that was really, really nice to hear. And talk tech as well. Because I think this is what a lot of people are kind of interested to hear now. And talk, we sort of touched on this a little bit, Esther, at the start of the conversation about like people, wanting to focus on their practice and not really having the resources. But what is the digital literacy like at some of these major cultural institutions across the country? Like, yes, they've figured out how to, how Facebook works and to put stuff on Instagram. Yes, they've figured out how to sell tickets. But is the technical infrastructure and human capability to drive the type of change there yet? Like, I'm really, I'm happy to talk, like, actually in this conversation, talk literally about what infrastructure is.
I think it varies widely. There are plenty of individuals and organisations who have got some really fantastic systems, partly because they've been using them in their back ends to be sharing, work, images, screen-based work with institutions overseas. Maybe it's a collections management issue. There are also, for example, in the performing arts, range of organisations and venues who are well set up to stream at broadcast quality. And that's what we were seeing at the very outset with the venues who were showing us, a range of performing arts experiences, because that technology was always ready to go in the venue. I think it's, I think the question really is it's a mix of, you know, there's the technology, and then there's the, okay, what do we do with it? I don't think the challenge is one of largely having access to the technology, simply because there are a great many kinds of online and digital experiences that we can present with a fairly basic range of technologies, and using a range of free and low-cost apps and so on. And so I think it's really about, you know, how do you find that point of difference? You know, how do you really engage? Some of the most interesting online experiences I've had lately have been some of the lunchtime presentations of experimental work, or evening, you know, evening talks that are like partly, you know, a conversation exchange, but partly the presentation of a work of art using a different format. And I guess the final thing I would say is that I'm always intrigued by, you know, how we use the digital, how we use various online technologies to present a kind of a hi-fi and low-tech experience that really connects us in an experiential and a tactile way. One of the really clever things that the Portable Film Festival did right at the beginning was to have that ice cream cart as well. And so, you know, you're at Federation Square, you've got, you know, a Wi-Fi, like obviously, you know, you need something to actually be supporting, because we weren't in a situation where there was, you know, free, widely accessible Wi-Fi, or people had that kind of data capability or account on their phone. But that instantly created a sense of community, because you're having your ice cream or sharing one, or, you know. And so I think that's the connection, is kind of, yeah, how do we bridge that high tech and lo-fi? How do we give a really multi-sensory experience that is qualitatively different from using your device or sitting in front of the screen?
It's really interesting. I tend to think of like cultural organizations and tech as sort of like, it's evolutionary. So I remember years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, we moved like American, like poets.org, the biggest poetry site in the world, they've been sitting on 15 years of like a website that, you know, that someone's uncle put up for them. And then they're like millions of viewers, like more. And you know, we went through that transformation for them, and they're on the journey. Like, I'm wondering, like with Myth-Al, like, where were you guys at? Like, you've got, like, it's not an easy feat to suddenly start streaming video if you literally just had a website. And I know Myth traditionally like launched a new platform every year. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but it did in the past. So maybe you can share some of the insights around what you technically, like, were you running off servers in the back cupboard, like many or even institutions?
So I guess, you know, look, it was we had 3 months basically to make the pivot. We did that in the context of being a skeleton crew as well. You know, our staffing would start to expand at scale at the point at which we made the cancellation for the regular festival. So it's a small team of people. It's always kind of a big project. And, you know, and in terms of this being something very unique in the whole history of Myth, it's something that our staff had to really, you know, begin step one, right from the ground up. There was a small degree of precedent prior to that in terms of festivals having to move or leap or be pushed into the space in very short turnaround. One of the most significant was CPH Docs in Copenhagen in March, who I think had a 6-day window between their cinema-based festival and having to fully relaunch themselves as an online festival. It was really interesting. I think now's a time where people are willing to be collaborative and share their experiences, share their risks, you know, and their outcomes, good and bad, in terms of helping to push everyone forward. I think that that's a real positive of what this time is in terms of our colleagues and our colleagues internationally. We worked with a tech developer called Shift72, who are based actually in our part of the world in New Zealand in Hamilton, and who have quickly become one of the absolute sort of leaders, very specifically in the space of film festivals jumping online. They're part of the player architecture, not design architecture, of a major industry streaming platform called Senando, and also work with a variety of other festivals or film markets, American Film Market, Cannes Virtual Marché de Film, Tallinn Black Night, South by Southwest, and CPH Docs themselves. They made the jump there. But at the time we approached them, they had 100 other requests, literally, from festivals who were facing this problem at this very moment. So we're very grateful to actually be able to fully engage with what capacity they had as an organization as well. And so, you know, a lot of it was sort of also considering not only the technical capabilities of the streaming, of the presentation, but also of the film deliverables as well. All the filmmakers and sales agents and everything in that space, and how people would have to actually deliver content differently and markedly differently within this space as well. And that kind of expands, you know, if there are questions in terms of audience. You know, from an access point of view, MIF will screen a number of films with captions and with audio description each year. And in terms of the materials, DCPs or cinema-based materials that are provided, some of these, and by virtue either of the production itself or in terms of some of the government funding and dimensions of contractual funding, will be delivered with those elements, but for cinema presentation. So when you're talking about online presentation, you know, at the moment we're enhancing our offering there. We're going out as a festival and getting AD tracks made for films to be able to present them appropriately in the space and to connect with that community as we wish to and absolutely want to, and really see kind of importance and value in. So there are platform-based questions technically, there are content-based questions technically, but everything is working. So okay, there's a lot of customer service. There's a lot of, you know, as we were talking about before, people are jumping into this space. And some people that would only see films in cinemas and would never stream anything. So there's a real educative challenge from the technical side, particularly because, you know, you can see things on laptop or TV or app or Chromecast or Apple TV. Like there's a myriad points of sort of personal activation technically from an audience or user stance. And for a lot of people, there's a lot of confusion that needs clearing there. So it's a technical challenge, but it's also very much a comms challenge on the audience side.
I might just make a point before we throw to the Q&A. It's really interesting. I'm sort of seeing this arc, and for some reason I'm thinking of TikTok, because if you look at early Facebook, right, as a social networking platform, and if you see screen grabs from back then, it's really kind of dusty. There weren't even fan pages, or they're not even called fan pages these days. But the platform was very, very limited in terms of what it could do, and that's expanded. TikTok sort of takes like all the social elements of a platform. It's got the video plug, you know, it's got the music piece sorted out. It's got its own cultural memes that happen that spread off the top of the platform, and it's all baked into it's not just the technology that is enabling, it's the culture too. So I kind of thinking cultural institutions of the future that have been through this are probably going to have to start thinking about that kind of extra audience layer. How do we bring about community? How do we technically allow ourselves to take community beyond just the act of viewing or experiencing a piece of art? I think it's fascinating. What a great conversation. We could probably go on for a couple of hours, but perhaps maybe we can throw to a couple of questions now and make a few points amongst that. Haley, can I throw to you to help us with this section?
Of course. Yeah, thank you so much for the conversations, guys. Also, the chat box totally agrees. It's been a wonderful conversation. Like our attendees are really enjoying it. I guess we've got a couple of questions here. I may not get through them all, so I'm really sorry for anyone that I don't get to. Let's start with the first one. So how are the organisers of online experiences taking into consideration the possibility that people will be physically overwhelmed with online interaction, and how will this affect their ability to interact with what you're putting out there?
Oh, that is such a good question, Vince.
You want that one?
It's yeah. I'll make a start because yeah, it's that's definitely been something that everyone's been talking about. Yeah, I think we've all been in exactly this conversation because it's not just as you say, Vince. It's being online interaction in general, let alone to then socialize in that way. I think we've all been in that conversation with friends who want to do Zoom drinks and you're like, can we just talk on the phone, or like is there some other way? And I think like I was saying before, the ways that bridge the tactile, that look at those other ways to engage. So I mentioned earlier a couple of favorite experiences of mine recently. So there's a lunchtime presentation of experimental work that Urban Theatre Projects have been running called Dream Sequence, which I encourage you to have a look at. You can, it's something that you can do over lunch, but it's not asking you to, sit there, listen to something, intensely intellectual, like us today. But it's really just, a range of very unexpected, intriguing things that are unfolding that an artist is presenting, and it's often an artistic experience that we don't tend to have, but that has been intriguing. I've also been part of a sort of a multi-country, a global work called 21 Days of Perceptual Practice, which is being led by David Young in Germany. And that is a group of us, I think there are 50, and once a day, an audio file arrives to our WhatsApp group. It's only between, say, 10 and 17 minutes in length. It is a set of reflections. It asks of us to do something which involves the body, which might also involve writing or diagramming in particular ways. And it's this focused, it's 21 days of heightening and focusing our perceptions in different ways. But again, it's an audio. It's not asking us to do this. You can listen to it lying down, Alexander technique style. And that has been incredibly useful. So again, I think it's, how do we bridge those, that experiential, because that is very much going to be needed.
Yes.
From the myth side as well, in terms of people feeling overwhelmed, I guess what we're presenting is, I guess, recognizable to people in the context of their regular screen life in a very basic sense. People stream, they watch content, they do so. But in terms of what we are and what we hope to be in this space, it's all about ensuring there's some personal dimension and personal point of connectivity with audiences, so they feel like we're not a machine. Suddenly we're not a kind of a cold platform. There's a human warmth to what is there. So the customer service and the comm side are really important, obviously, so people do not feel overwhelmed, so they can navigate what is completely a new experience of the festival, specifically a new technology or new apps for them, as well as being able to ensure they can actually get a great result out of their own space. It's important for audiences, it's important for filmmakers that the technical quality of their experience that they're having is really well realized, even as it differs from person to person. I think what's really important in this space for us is to articulate who we are as a festival, and ensure there's continuity in that, from a year in which people in cinemas to a year in which we're in the apocalypse. I think from 1 year to the next. So for us, it's kind of foregrounding a human dimension. We are very particular in terms of one-on-one help and how that happens in a variety of ways, and making sure like people feel that myth doesn't end with a screen, that there is someone and something behind that. And that the human dimension of the festival and the people, whether it be the audience or the staff, is part of the equation always.
Yeah, wonderful. Another question here is, talking about like, what do you think the possible benefits that may arise of these new delivery methods, and I guess new around audience appreciation. I know that earlier you kind of spoke about now with particularly Myth, Al, you're moving beyond Melbourne. Like you could be touching rural communities or you could be touching international communities. It's like, obviously that's like a huge positive of this now. Like, is there any others that you can see in the future?
Look, absolutely. And it's really just an expansion of what I've said previously, but we can think about audiences in ways we just haven't before, and we can flip the thinking of what is myth. We know what it is fundamentally, but what could it be in this space? So we suddenly have a blank canvas in front of us that we never had before. And in terms of thinking what that means, not only to COVID as a situation, but to ourselves as an organization and a festival and a point of cultural connectivity for people, it just sort of reinvents the wheel, really. And it could be many things. I mean, I've given the example of Myth Schools as one offering for one market and one specific set of ways. And, you know, that's imagined very much in terms of, I guess, social benefit and social good. And that's something that we hope to be part of the festival this year, like understanding people may be under emotional duress, financial duress. How can we use this platform to not only, you know, sustain what the festival does, which in itself is a bit of a radical act, but actually offer something positive in terms of cultural connectivity or pure escapism or distraction to audiences. So, I mean, all I'll say really is a very general sense of potential from what we have as a technical tool, a curatorial tool, and an audience tool, which is something now, and in terms of how we foresee its development, how we could add to this platform technically and creatively, there's so much to think about from this very first step.
And just briefly in response to that, I think it's the question is also, I think, one of accessibility. So the barrier to accessibility now isn't about physically getting to a venue. It's about having good internet access and having a device that you can actually, so that then becomes the barrier. I have heard a lot of colleagues in the disability arts sector say that, you know, while we're complaining a lot about you know, the world being locked to us at the moment, particularly here in Victoria, in many ways, artistic and cultural experiences have not been so accessible to people with disability ever. You know, the fact that we can do this, you can click on a button and have the captions, you can, you know, for people with social anxiety, you know, to be able to do a range of things differently. I think that has to be something that we hold on to going forward. How do we continue to make experiences accessible?
Yeah. Great, thanks. Listen, I think we're probably at time now in terms of as far as we can go for questions, but what an amazing discussion. I'd love to pull the three of us together another time to talk about something completely different, because I'm sure it'll be just as interesting. Al, thanks for coming in the middle of the festival. Good luck with the rest of it. And I encourage everyone else to check out the program if you haven't already. It's on for another couple of weeks, Al?
Till the 23rd.
Yeah. So you've got still a bit of time left. And I want to also say thanks to Esther for coming along and being part. I know you've had a very busy schedule and really always loved seeing you and talking to you and having these sorts of conversations. So thanks for being part of it.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. This has been great.
I want to thank Sarah for your work in the background there for helping.
Can't wait to see Sarah's drawing.
Thanks, Aileen, for technically getting this up and run and for posting the Q&A. And also I want to thank Cristiano on our team who helped put together the wonderful graphics and artwork from our team. They've done a good job and they care about this work just as much as we do. It's good to have that at the front and acknowledge it. So thanks everyone. If you more information at portable.com.au, look out for the video and the newsletter, and see you soon.
Thanks everyone. Bye. See you at MIF tonight.